Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
Esme opened her eyes. The clock on the bedside table showed 7 o'clock in the morning. Miles' hand was on top of hers and she knew by his steady breathing that he was still sleeping soundly. Esme gently removed his hand, cautiously climbed out from under the covers, and went into the shower. When she came out of the bathroom, Miles was no longer in the bedroom. He was rattling the dishes in the kitchen and Esme headed for the smell of freshly brewed coffee. "Good morning," smiled Miles and kissed her gently on the cheek. "Sit down, I'll feed you in a minute." He put ham, vegetable and cheese sandwiches, an omelet and a mug of aromatic coffee on the table. They ate in silence. Miles cleared the table himself and stuck the dishes in the dishwasher. Get dressed up, and we're leaving in an hour." "I'll drive you to work," he said affectionately. "You'll spoil me so. I'm going to love being wooed like this. I'll get lazy and stop doing anything at all around the house. I'll trust all the chores to you." Esme smirked and looked intently at his expression. "I feel like spoiling you." "Consider our courtship period begun," Miles stated with an important look and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you," she replied, embarrassed, lost in his intense gaze. Donte dragged all the bags out into the hallway and slammed the front door. "Let her find another fool to follow all her whims," Donte scolded to himself, "and I've had enough. I've had enough. Idiot. From the first day of our life together, I felt like an outsider in this fucking family." Donte loaded his bags into the car and drove to the hotel. All the way there, he raced through his head, thinking of the best way to approach Esme and beg her forgiveness. In the morning, as soon as he got to work, he immediately called Esme into his office. He decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with her, to pity her, and to lay out all his plans for the rest of his life. "Hi, come in, sit down," he pointed his hand to her chair. "Esme, I left Lillian. I took all my things. In the near future she and I will be divorced and we will have nothing more to do with her. She lost the baby," Donte said in the same breath. "What's that got to do with me? Why are you telling me all this?" Esme asked with a shrug of her shoulders and a surprised look in his eyes. She didn't feel like talking to Donte at all. She sighed loudly, finally realizing that she didn't need such a man, who was ready to switch to another woman right away before she could part with her lawful spouse. "Maybe you and I can forget all past wrongs, for the sake of our child," he continued the conversation unabashedly, biting his lower lip. "Your jokes are not appropriate at all. Please stop harassing me and pestering me with unnecessary talk. Otherwise I'll complain to Miles and you could be in big trouble," Esme said, minting every word. "So that's how you talk? You started an affair with a rich man right away," he hissed and pounded his fist on the table. "Remember? We're gone. I'm going to complain to Miles today. Let him talk to you himself. I'm not going to waste my nerve cells on you." She simply had no more words for indignation. "Can I go?" "Go," he answered grudgingly and let her go to her workplace. He began to mock her. How she spoke. "Is it all right that the baby is mine? Let's see how you talk when I claim him. You could have taken your time starting an affair with a complete stranger. Now I would go back to her, apologize and live together. Yes, I'm guilty, but I realized everything. I realized my mistake." Donte sighed heavily and looked around his office. "I guess I'll have to vacate my place as director soon. Let them choke on it. I don't want anything from them. Tomorrow I'll write my own letter of resignation. I'm going to work as an ordinary clerk. I'll rent an apartment and live in peace. No one will pick my brains and get on my nerves." Lillian woke up close to lunchtime. Her head ached from the amount of alcohol she had drunk the night before. Yesterday she had spent the day packing Donte's things and getting ready for a serious conversation. And when he came over, she just kicked him out of the house and cried into the morning. Not because he had left, but because she was just hurt that all his big words of great love had turned out to be a lie. Lillian pulled out the medicine cabinet, took a headache pill, and decided to call her father. Dad, hi. Want to hear the latest scoop? I kicked my husband out of the house yesterday. I packed up all his things and told him to go away. What a show you put on, whistled Miles. What are you going to do next? Get a divorce or bring him back? His father grinned. No, Dad, that's enough. I've fought enough for him as it is. I've done everything I can to have him with me. And in the end? Now he dreams of getting his Esme back, Lillian replied, wiping away her tears. Where do you come to such conclusions? Did you come up with it yourself, or did he tell you that news? Asked Miles grudgingly. He confessed it himself, Daddy. So be afraid that your Esme might come to his senses and leave you. They're having a baby, after all. I decided to slap my father with a hurtful word. Let him not even hope. Esme, I won't give him, Miles hissed. What, it's that serious? I don't understand anything. She's just an ordinary gray mouse. And men all want to be with her, Lillian quipped. Why don't you talk to her? She'll give me a master class in seducing men. Lillian continued the conversation, gripping her temples with her hands. Come and visit us tonight. I want my two favorite women to find common ground with each other. Miles suddenly offered and realized that this was his most cherished wish. No, Daddy, I'm not ready for that yet. I need time to come to my senses a little, to calm down, to let go of past hurts. File for divorce eventually, she sighed heavily. I hear you, Miles replied, and anyway, how's your mood? You did break up with your husband, didn't you? He asked cautiously. And the mood, Dad, is just disgusting. I feel like I've been pooped on. Why did I get mixed up with Donte? Now I'll have to change my last name again. I can't have the same last name as your Esme. There will be different conversations among friends, Lillian grinned bitterly. Don't worry about it and sleep well. Soon Esme will have another last name, Miles replied with a smile. Are you sure about that? I thought when you took possession of her body you'd calm down a little and look at her differently. Don't even get your hopes up. I've only confirmed my right choice. I assure you, the wedding will be soon. Get your outfit ready. You must look as good as the bride at our wedding. You are our daughter, after all, Miles grinned. Yeah, Daddy, you surprised me with my new mom, Lillian quipped and disconnected the call. Esme sat in the car, staring out the windshield. My God, what am I doing? She shouted to herself, Clara is going to be shocked when she finds out I didn't stay home tonight. It's like I'm hypnotized into following Miles and I can't help it. And most importantly, I love it. I feel like a woman who is loved and her every whim is fulfilled. Will it really always be like this? I can't even believe it, as if I found myself in a fairy tale, where a kind wizard decided to rid me of all the negativity that was present in my life. What are you thinking about? Miles' question distracted her from her thoughts. Nothing, just thinking, Esme whispered and coughed, trying to recover her voice. Isn't work hard for you? Maybe send you straight to maternity leave, or shorten your workday, Miles asked without taking his eyes off the road. No, why? I'll work. No need to do anything. Otherwise I'll go crazy with idleness, Esme exclaimed. Miles smiled and shook his head. What kind of person you are, after all? What kind of person? Esme interrupted him. Well, not like everyone else. Another one would be asking for my money right now and going straight to shopping, he said with a chuckle. What shopping? I have a report to finish right away. Anyway, everything went so fast that I still can't come to my senses. My head is spinning with everything that's going on, Esme bit her lower lip and shook her head. Come on, come to your senses already. Get used to it. There's no turning back, Miles said in a deadly serious tone and waited for her answer, which he didn't. Young lady, can you hear me? He shook her shoulder gently. I hear you, she answered, and sighed heavily. I just can't figure out why you're doing all this. Miles immediately frowned and fell silent. Then he coughed loudly and replied. Why don't you take it easy? I've got the best intentions for you, and I'm not going to part with you for the next 30 or even 40 years. Miles parked the car outside the office and pecked Esme on the cheek. See you tonight, he said affectionately. See you tonight, she replied faintly, opened the front door, and got out of the car. At lunchtime, Clara walked into her friend's office. Are we going to lunch? She asked. Yes, of course. I'll be right out of the program. Esme smiled at her friend, got up from her chair, and headed for the exit. The friends hadn't seen each other for a week. Clara took a few days without pay and went to visit her parents in another town. So tell me. What's new with you? Asked Esme. I moved in with Miles yesterday. We live together now, Esme said in the same breath and looked at her friend, who opened her mouth in surprise. Both went silent and looked at each other. I don't understand, how did you move in with him? Clara interjected, just in case. I packed up my things yesterday and moved into his house, Esme replied with a chuckle. Wow. So now you're living with our main boss? She asked incredulously. More accurately, with the head founder, Esme laughed. I didn't expect you to. What's the rush? Clara raised her eyebrows in surprise. I don't know how it happened myself. I decided it was for the best. Though doubts overtake me and somehow I'm a little scared. You know, he looked after me so beautifully, just like a little baby. Like I was the best woman in the world. I felt happy and attractive. I felt so good and comfortable with him. I never had anybody but Donte. And when he had a mistress, he stopped paying attention to me. I thought there was something wrong with me. I was running around in beauty salons, I got manicures and pedicures and had my eyebrows done. And he didn't even notice it, he always came home from work tired. I was beginning to think I was becoming frigid, my husband was no longer aroused. And then Miles with his insistence. And I drowned in him. I hope you did the right thing. The main thing that you then do not regret. Be careful. There's such a little girl. Make sure they don't set you up. Thank you, my friend. Calmed me down, Esme sighed heavily. I was just surprised at the news and told you what was on my mind. It's not like I don't know your relationship with each other. It seems that while I was away your life has changed drastically, Clara grinned and held up her index finger. By the way, Human Resources said that Donte wrote his letter of resignation, she quickly rambled on, remembering the news she wanted to share with Esme. Too bad for him. He left his wife. What happened between them, I don't know. He asked me to think hard and forgive him for the sake of the baby, Esme grinned. Ha! 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 Laughed Clara, is he mixed up in anything? Who's going to take him in? If you compare Miles and him, it's heaven and earth. Miles at least is rich, didn't look that you're pregnant, started courting nicely, surrounded you with care, attention. This one. I don't even want to talk about him. How much time he paid attention to me. He put his hand on my knee under the table, or accidentally pinched my ass. I, of course, stopped it. But what if there had been someone else in my place? Long ago would have spent time together in some hotel. So there's no one to feel sorry for. Let him find himself a wife, preferably deaf and blind, so he can rest and live at his own pleasure, Clara scolded angrily. Clara, is it true about the signs? Do you think I'm fooling you? Of course it's true. And here's the way Miles looked at you, then, at the show. I was even jealous of you then. Esme remembered tonight, and the echoes of pleasure ran through her body. She had never felt so good with a man. If you compare Donte and Miles, Miles wins in every way. My God, what am I thinking? Esme scolded herself in her mind and looked at Clara, who was telling her something enthusiastically and bursting with laughter. At the end of the day, Esme turned off the computer, grabbed her purse, and went home. Near the elevator, she met Donte. He turned away from her and walked silently into the elevator. Esme went outside, saw Miles' car, and hurried to him. How was your day? He kissed her cheek. I'm fine, she replied and looked out the side window. Donte's car was pulling out of its parking spot. Miles' phone rang. He, watching Donte without looking at the incoming number, answered it. His face changed beyond recognition in a second. What about her? Is she alive? Dictate the address, he shouted. What happened? Esme all cringed. She realized something terrible had happened. Lillian crashed her car. Esme clamped her mouth shut with her palm to keep from screaming. She's alive, she asked unabashedly. She's in intensive care, Miles answered briefly. Miles drove quickly toward the city hospital building, breaking all traffic rules and speed limits. Esme sat silently in the passenger seat, afraid to even say a word lest she get caught in the hot seat and praying to all the saints that they themselves would not get into any accident. As they approached the hospital, Miles quickly turned the key in the ignition and shut off the engine. Are you with me? He shouted as he went. Of course I won't leave you like this, Esme replied, and quickly jumped out of the car, too. What she wanted more than anything right now was to calm Miles down and support him, to keep him from being sad and pull him out of his depression. He grabbed her hand and together they ran to the emergency room. Holding hands, they ran up to the nurse on duty, who listened to them and looked carefully at the register. She used an internal phone to contact the doctor, who operated on Lillian as a matter of urgency. The doctor allowed them to go up to his office. The nurse gave them gowns and shoe covers and showed them directions to find an elevator to get to the right floor. Her condition is severe. She is now asleep under anesthesia. Numerous contusions, wounds to the chest, head, 3 broken ribs, open fracture of the right leg, the doctor said tiredly. Doctor, can we, after intensive care, move her to the service room? If you need any necessary medication, just tell me. I'll do everything, Miles asked quickly. Let's wait until tomorrow. I'll do my rounds in the morning. There's nothing I can tell you right now. Everything necessary and depending on me I have done. But the human body is unpredictable. Doctor, can I see her? Asked Miles with a pleading voice and pulled some bills from his wallet. Put the money away. She's not alone in the ICU. There are 6 people in there. She's just sleeping. Well, look at the sleeping daughter, and what does that get you? Do you still have my cell phone? I called you on it today. You can call me tomorrow morning at 9:30. Miles sighed heavily and shook his head. What am I supposed to do until tomorrow? I'll go crazy not knowing, Miles replied tiredly. Let's hope your little girl survives. The body is young, strong. I think she'll make it. Thank you, doctor, for your support. Here's my card. If you need financial help, I'm ready to give it. Call me, Miles handed him his card. Thank you, we never turn down financial help. The doctor took the card from Miles' hands and put it in his pocket. The important thing is that the spine is intact. And the bruises will heal, Esme reassured him as best she could. If it was anything serious, the doctor would have said. She continued to reassure Miles in the car as they drove home. Thank God I have you. I'd go crazy right now if I were alone, he smiled bitterly at Esme and sighed heavily. Do you think Donte will report? He hasn't been called, just because Lillian must have deleted his number from her contacts, Miles asked her, in a kind of prostration. Let's not say anything to anyone yet. We don't really know anything yet. They'll wonder why we do it. They'll only make us more scared. Donte's a good guy, too. He asked me to think about it and go back to him for the baby, Esme reasoned aloud, looking at Miles. What a freak. I never liked him. I don't know what my daughter sees in him. Clinging to him like he's the last male specimen on Earth, Miles said through gritted teeth. It was not until the 3rd day that Lillian was transferred to a private room. Miles went in to see her and his heart sank at the sight. Her right leg was suspended, her head and chest in bandages. Her face was all abrasions. My darling, he almost wept, what have you done to yourself? He shook his head and gently touched his fingers on her hand. How you frightened us. I thought I was going crazy until I saw you, he said affectionately. Dad, I'm sorry. I bring you nothing but trouble all the time, Lillian replied, barely restraining herself from crying. Be quiet, talk less. Take care of your strength. We need you healthy, her father interrupted. Lillian, Donte, tell me you're in the hospital, he asked her. Don't. I don't want to get upset. I'll see him and start crying. Tears appeared in her eyes. He doesn't love me anyway. Why would he come here? I will learn to live without him. It will be hard for me to do that, but I will try, she continued and grinned bitterly. And why are you alone? Where's Esme? She suddenly asked a question. She's sitting in the hallway waiting for me. She doesn't want to upset you with her presence. My father smiled as he continued to lightly rub her fingers on his hands. Dad, ask her forgiveness for me. I've done a lot of nasty things to her. I guess I had to be in that car accident to realize all that, Lillian said faintly, and a tear rolled down her cheek again. Well, the important thing is that you get better. We'll deal with the rest somehow. Miles wiped away her tears, talking to her like she was a little kid. I didn't tell you I had the best daddy in the world. Lillian smiled through her strength and wrinkled her chest in pain. Thank you, little girl. You're the best one I've got, too, despite your hysterical temper, he sneered and smiled affectionately. No, Daddy, when I get out of here things will be different. No more sitting on your neck and wasting your money aimlessly. I want to work. I want you to be proud of me, not just blushing over my antics, she continued. If that's true, you're doing a great job, he smiled, but the main thing now is for you to recover, and then you can think about work. We'll deal with problems as they come up, Miles answered her. Okay, Daddy. Say hello to your Esme and don't forget to ask her forgiveness for your daughter. I will, just listen to the doctors and get well soon. Deciding to change jobs, Donte worked his second week. He had already made arrangements and found a new job. True, as a simple office clerk, and the salary was different from what he was getting now. But at least he would have peace of mind and not depend on the mood of his once dear Lillian. Today his secretary told him that Lillian had been in an accident and was in the hospital. He immediately ran to Esme to find out the details and to go to the hospital. But Esme said Lillian didn't want to see or hear from him. That's how in one fell swoop I lost everything I had. No wife, no child, no family, no normal job. No nothing. Everything will have to start from scratch, Donte scolded himself. Nobody wants to hear or see me. How proud everyone is. All men cheat, just some do it wisely and don't get caught. And I, like a sucker, ran to get a divorce. Miles walked into his office uninvited and distracted him from his sad thoughts. They said hello and gave each other a contemptuous look. Have you come to say goodbye to me? Donte grinned wryly. Are you afraid I can't leave without a scandal? He said in a sarcastic tone as he continued to drill Miles with a hateful look. I've come to you with a great offer. I think we can make a deal with you. Donte opened his mouth in surprise and looked intently at Miles, wondering what he could offer him. You stay on as director, but you give up your parental rights to the child. Think hard about my offer. Miles's offer sounded like a thunderbolt out of the blue. Of course, Donte would have liked to stay on and run the company. The position could have solved almost all of his financial problems. But giving up his child was absolutely not in his plans. No, I would never agree to that. The child must know his own father, even if we don't live together. Esme and I are getting married soon, and I want to give the child my last name and middle name, Miles said in a calm tone. It's up to you. Even if you don't agree, the child will still live with us. Think hard with your head. You'll get married again, have children, live your life to your satisfaction, he continued to persuade Donte. No, I can't give up my baby, Donte whispered quietly, as if coaxing himself, and shook his head in surprise. You see, Donte, you have to have a tough temper to work as a director. Sometimes you have to show your not-so-great qualities in order to achieve your intended goal. I give you 2 days. In that time, you have to make up your mind whether you're leaving this office or staying. And I don't care what decision you make. Anyway, the child will be raised by me and he will listen to my advice. And he'll call me daddy, too, because you've already lost that title." Miles was about to leave, but an interesting question flew into his back. "What kind of people are you? Surrounding Esme and me like crows and circling around us. Your daughter has got to me to the point where I have no room left in my soul. Now all that's left to do is to wait for you to get Esme and, just like your daughter, throw her out for nothing," Donte hissed angrily. "Gee, how brave you talk," laughed Miles. "You're the one who dumped Esme, and now you're blaming me for all your sins. Why did you walk around, cheat, don't appreciate your wife? No one dragged you with a rope, you were the one who fell for Lillian's tricks. I didn't even have to talk you into it. You were happy to go along with everything. And Lillian is an attractive girl, unmarried, she met you and wanted to marry you. And you didn't put up much of a fight, or am I wrong about something?" Miles raised his eyebrows and looked intently at Donte. "Why aren't you talking?" Donte was stubbornly silent. Miles' suggestion took him by surprise. He tried to find words to somehow justify himself and blame him for all his failures, but Miles' accusations were firmly planted in his mind and crowded out all thought, leaving only resentment and frustration. "I'll think about it," Donte muttered quietly, not recognizing his own voice. "That's good. Just remember, nothing depends on your decision. Whether you give up your child or not, I will be the father anyway. A father is not the one who gave birth, but the one who raised him. And you did everything you could to have me raise the child. By the way, thank you for the wife." Miles grinned and headed out the door. He turned his head at the door and said, emphasizing each word, "We'll talk in 2 days. I really want to give my wife a wedding present." Miles walked out of the office and shut the door tightly behind him. I'd already been persuaded by his daughter once, and it was all beautifully painted. But in the end it turned out just the opposite. No, I'm not going to give him that joy. Let him not even hope, Donte reasoned to himself. He looked regretfully at his chair, looked around the office and sighed heavily. It's a pity to part with his position, of course, but he does not intend to trust these people anymore. Men like Miles will do anything for their own advantage. I won't give them another victory. Let them have their own children. And with my child I will somehow deal with myself, made the final conclusion Donte and was pleased with his decision. I'm not a puppet to them. It's not a fact that they will let me work in peace. I've already made sure of that. No sooner had I been appointed than I was left at the wrecking ball and looking for a new job. It was exactly 5:45 p.m. when the entire workforce was quietly getting ready for the end of the day. Esme saw Miles in the doorway. Shall we go home? His words made me feel warm at heart, lifted my spirits. It made me want to drop everything and run home. Miles, what are you doing here? Esme asked in surprise, a silly question. Came to get you, he grinned and pressed his lips to her cheek. Okay, I'll get ready in a minute, she replied and shifted her gaze to her coworkers, who were surreptitiously watching her. Is it okay that we left a little early? Esme asked cautiously. Luckily for you, I'm directly related to the firm's management. Take my word for it, no one will dare scold you. Miles grinned. He held out his hand to her and they walked out of the office together, then made their way amicably to the elevator. Did you come here on business? Or did you come especially for me? Asked Esme. Both, Miles answered evasively. I see. Are you already keeping secrets from me? She answered grudgingly and defiantly turned away from him. You could say that. I just offered Donte a deal he can't refuse, and Miles retold her of their man-to-man conversation. You could have asked me before you went to him, too, Esme said grudgingly. Donte will never refuse a child. So you can look for a new principal and not waste your time, Esme said calmly and followed Miles into the elevator. What do you want to bet that will do? Miles got into a taste and held out his hand to Esme. What do you want to bet? She replied cheerfully and held up her index finger. Come on, if you bet, I pick the firm's director, Esme suggested. And if I argue, you nominate your candidate. Deal. Miles broke the handshake. He put his arm around Esme's waist and they walked out into the parking lot, I even know who you'll nominate if you win this bet. Miles looked closely at Esme and grinned. Good thinking. I'll keep the father of my child. Let him pay good child support. It will be my safety cushion. What a fool I am. Why did I only argue? Began to whine Miles. An agreement is more expensive than money, Esme replied seriously and grinned. I just stopped trusting men completely. Sorry, the teachers were good, she smirked. Donte stepped outside, breathed in the fresh air, and took his time wandering to the parking lot. He walked to his car and saw Miles' car pulling out of its parking spot. The Miles blinked its headlights at him and drove past. Wife, Donte hissed angrily, you're not married yet, and you're already throwing around words like that left and right. He wants the child in his name. Donte mentally showed him 2 3-fingered figures and scolded him. Esme is a fool. Why did she get involved with this family? She should have seen the way they treated me. No, she wanted to try living in chocolate, too. Donte sighed heavily and spat on the pavement. Donte worked his last day of work. He checked all the papers, and at the same time he packed his personal belongings into a box, throwing away the unnecessary stuff. The door opened, and Miles walked into the office. You're going. He saw the box on the desk and raised his eyebrows in surprise. Hello to you, too, replied Donte, not intending to answer his question. Continuing to pull all sorts of trinkets that had accumulated over time out of the drawer and toss them into the box. Still decided to do it his way, didn't want to take my advice. Good for you, Miles quipped and clapped his hands, that's the man. I just don't see what that does for you. He shrugged and flopped down in his chair with his leg over his head. Donte gave him an indifferent look, head to toe, and continued quietly packing. And you and I are different people in general, and will probably never understand each other, Donte replied calmly. Well, I get that, Miles grinned, putting his hands on the table and interlocking his fingers. Why don't you change your mind and stay after all? You've shown yourself to be a pretty good leader. I'm pleased with you, Miles continued. That's out of the question. Donte replied. I'm not a wimp for you to manipulate me. Donte broke away from his exercise and looked at Miles with hatred. Remember, my child will not have a birth father, only in the event of my death. Think hard about it, maybe you'd better kill me. It would only make everyone feel better, grinned Donte. Well, don't make it so difficult. You're not bothering me. Esme and I are fine. Miles unclenched his fingers and leaned back in his chair. I came about something else. Donte was stubbornly silent and made no attempt to keep up the conversation. He tried to gather every last detail so he would never come back here again. Come on, don't be a fool. Nobody's going to fire you. The way you worked, you'll still work. As a manager, you're good for everybody, Miles said calmly. Donte opened his mouth in surprise, leaned back in his chair, and looked intently at Miles. What was that now? He asked and relaxed his tie. I say don't be a fool. Work the way you've been working. Nobody's going to bother you, Miles repeated his words. Is this some kind of joke? I don't get it. I'm tired of adjusting to you, work or not work. I'm sick of it. I'm leaving, but I don't want anything. I don't want your handouts, Donte answered him and threw another trinket into the box. Esme asked me to. She wants a decent alimony from you. Donte again measured his gaze at Miles. Are you saying you refuse your offer? He asked in surprise. What can I do to you if you're so stubborn? The law is on your side. Not kill you, really. Time will tell which of us was right, Miles sighed heavily. Keep working. You're good at it. Miles held out his hand to Donte. Donte hesitated for a moment, but then held out his. Well, that's the deal. Miles got up and walked out. Take your letter of resignation and tear it up, he said at the door and walked out into the waiting room. Donte sat in his chair and looked at the closed door. Slam the door and send him away? Quit and forget the whole thing like a bad dream? What would I get out of it? And there is a position, money, connections with the right people? I have to step on my throat and keep working? What else can I do? I can always quit, at least the seniority will earn. Then, if anything, there will be more opportunities to get a good job, Donte thought to himself, sitting in his comfortable director's chair. Lillian was already on the mend. The abrasions had healed, some had disappeared altogether. The pain in her chest was still there, the blow had been too hard, but it was much easier. Her leg still hurt and she couldn't stand on it. She had to use crutches to get around. Lillian was lying on her bed, rummaging through her phone, when Donte appeared in the room. "Hi," he smiled and adjusted the robe that was slung over his shoulders. "Hi," replied Lillian in greeting and continued looking at the phone screen. "How are you?" he asked unabashedly. "Could be worse," she answered grudgingly. "Thank God, it all worked out." Donte smiled again and took a seat in the chair that stood close to the bed. Lillian was silent and not paying attention to Donte, was engaged in correspondence on her phone. "I wanted to come earlier, but I was told you didn't want to see me," he muttered, not taking his eyes off her. "To be honest, I've missed your feisty nature. Not enough drive in my life right now." He grinned slightly and sighed heavily. "You don't want to talk to me?" "Donte," she put the phone aside, "I wanted to tell you that I cheated on you. I was never pregnant. I deceived you, wanted you to leave your wife and marry me. I'm sorry. I would never do that now." She breathed the air out of her lungs in relief and lowered her eyes. Dante's face stretched, he went pale, and he stared at Lillian with his jaw dropped, scrolling through the information he had received. Then he gathered his thoughts a little, shook his head, and spoke in a sad voice. "Why? Why did you need it?" "I don't know." She shook her head and grinned bitterly. "I thought we could be happy together," she answered quietly. "It only seemed like that to us. In fact, it was a different scenario," he barely squeezed out. "You never could love me," Lillian said, barely holding back her tears, and lowered her head. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "The heart wants what it wants," she replied quietly. "Thank you for coming." She wiped a tear that had rolled down her cheek with her hand. "Can I come see you again tomorrow for a while?" asked Donte. "You don't have to. I was beginning to get used to the idea of not having you." "I wish he hadn't come. Only made me sad," Lillian muttered aloud and wiped away her tears. What was all that for? Lillian remembered the first time she had seen Donte, her keen eye immediately singling him out from the crowd. He was handsome, well-groomed, with a wedding ring on his right hand. A wife is not a wall, she'll move up, she thought then. Then she started flirting and making eyes at him. And you have to hand it to her, she was very good at it. Donte was completely taken in by the new feeling, and from that day on they practically never parted. When Lillian told Donte that she was pregnant, he agreed to the divorce pretty quickly. Then there was the wedding. Everything seemed to work out, live and let loose. But then it turned out that Esme was going to have a baby. From that moment on, things didn't go according to her script. Lillian grabbed her temples and squeezed her eyes shut, trying to free herself from the unpleasant memories. "How many times, Lillian? Have some pride. You are not loved and you still hope for a miracle," she moaned and stared at one point to keep from crying. "Can I come to you tomorrow?" She mocked Donte and mentally sent him to 3 cheerful letters. Why come? To tell me once again that our meeting was a mistake? She grinned bitterly. No. Stop humiliating me and making a fool of me. I'll get out of the hospital and ask my father to help me get a job. Donte will be sorry, I promise. I'll do what I can and can't to be talked about as a person and not as my father's hysterical daughter. Miles is in a great mood this morning. Lillian is being discharged from the hospital. Finally. All the procedures have been passed, the tests are normal. No more lying in a hospital bed. Besides, Lillian herself is really eager to go home, and she says she wants to work. She wants to work, and wants to prove to herself that she is still able to do something. Of course, Miles likes the way she thinks, but there is some doubt that she won't make it, and she is bound to get into trouble. Knowing Lillian and her character, it's scary for the people who will work with her. "Dad, when are you going to get me a job?" asked Lillian as soon as they got in the car. Lillian, look at you, you can barely walk. What kind of job? Let's hold off on that question for a while. Life's long, you'll still have time to work. Miles waved her off and focused on the road. I knew it was just empty promises on your part. Don't you understand that I have to do something so I don't slip back into a deep hole, Lillian said, almost crying with resentment in her voice, and turned away from him, showing with all her appearance that she was offended by her father. I don't understand, do you want to go to work right now? I just thought you'd get some rest, get your strength back from the accident. Miles began to justify himself. I've been in the hospital, my bones are all sore already. You're not sending me to dig trenches, are you? And you can work with papers in an office with a sore leg. Lillian was not backing down from her goal, trying to get through to her father. That's it, I give up, I get that you're determined. When do you want to go to work? Miles asked in a serious tone. Tomorrow, Lillian replied emphatically. There's an opening for a deputy director, but you haven't graduated yet, Miles quipped and looked at her daughter carefully. I've made up my mind. I'm not going to lose this year. I'm going to transfer to a correspondence course. Will I be hired for this position without a graduate degree? At least with a probationary period, Lillian looked at Miles with pleading eyes. Miles hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. The principal is Donte. There are no other openings yet. Or we'll have to wait a little while, Miles replied calmly and looked at Lillian. Isn't there any other vacancy? She said uncertainly. Not yet. Just wait a little while. Maybe something will come up. What are you in such a hurry for? Continued to discourage her Miles. I agree, Lillian replied confidently, after some confusion. Are you sure? Absolutely. I have more energy than you could ever dream of, Daddy. I'll prove to you all that I'm not nothing. You'll be proud of me. And no Donte will stop me, she replied firmly and grinned. I applaud your zeal to work, well done, praise. But working under your husband's direction. Ex-husband, Daddy. We have no children, no property. They'll divorce us fast, she interrupted. I haven't noticed such a stubborn character in you before, Miles shook his head and smiled. Then let's meet tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the principal's office. I'll introduce him to the deputy. I don't think he'll be thrilled either, Miles sighed heavily. Be sure he'll thank you in time, Lillian said thoughtfully. Maybe you want to keep the relationship? Trust me, it won't be easy for you. It's morally hard to work with someone you still love. Seeing him every day is unbearable, Miles looked at his daughter sympathetically. I'm strong, I can handle it. You'll see, he'll regret that he broke up with me. But it will be too late, Lillian replied seriously. Just let's make a deal, at work we only think about work. No figuring things out, recriminations, yelling, crying, or other scandals. You don't have to worry about that, you won't have to be embarrassed for me anymore, Lillian replied confidently. I sure hope so, Miles sighed heavily. Dad, where are you taking me? I don't understand, Lillian asked in surprise. To our house. What are you going to do at home alone? You can stay with us for now, Miles shrugged. Esme and I decided so, he added. No, take me home. I'm not ready to go out with her yet. No offense to you, but I don't want to yet. I need time to accept her. I'm sorry. Miles braked sharply, turned to Lillian, and, looking her straight in the eyes, spoke. No matter how stubborn you are, you will have to accept my choice. You simply have no other choice. After these words, he silently started the engine and turned the car in the direction of Lillian's house. In total silence, he drove her home in about 20 minutes. When the car stopped outside her driveway, he shut off the engine and heard, "Thanks, Daddy." Miles silently carried her bag up to the third floor, made his way to the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. I'll have some coffee at your place and then I'll go. I have a lot to do today, he said. I still have to get Donte ready so he doesn't have a shock tomorrow. Miles shook his head. Dad, don't worry, he and I will work out. We'll only have a business relationship, and we'll only argue about work issues. You work it out amongst yourselves. I have enough problems of my own. The new year was approaching. Lillian had already been working as a deputy director for 2 months. She had to read a lot, study relevant documents, sit up late into the evening and sort out papers. It had been a long time since she had taken care of her personal life. For her, the main aim now was not to let her father down, so that no one could reproach her for taking someone else's place and just sitting idle. The unanimous decision was to have a New Year's Eve corporate party. It was to be at a tourist base with a snowy winter forest and a trail where you could rent and ride a snowmobile. Esme had another ultrasound and was reassured that it would be a boy. And right after the New Year's Eve holidays, there will be a marriage ceremony to celebrate the union of 2 loving hearts, Esme and Miles. Although Donte swore to himself that Miles had given him a deputy who couldn't do anything and didn't know anything, he didn't say no and helped Lillian in everything. He had to explain things to her himself. It annoyed a lot of the staff, but everyone gossiped among themselves and smiled at her and offered to help. No one wanted to attract trouble so as not to incur the wrath of an influential father. So, are we going to the campground tomorrow? We'll take a walk out of town. You'll get some fresh air, Miles declared with a satisfied smile and kissed Esme on the top of his head. What am I supposed to do? Do I have a choice? She replied obediently. You're not asking me, you're just putting me on the spot, Esme replied angrily, lounging on the couch under the fluffy plaid. Indeed, why was she so upset? The man she loves doesn't leave her at home as unnecessary ballast, he takes her with him. He wants to spend the holiday with her, in cheerful company and a pleasant atmosphere. To be honest, I don't feel like going with you. Everyone will be drinking alcohol, partying, having fun. And I'll just be looking at everyone with a sober eye, Esme sighed deeply. You don't want to go? No, honey, that's out of the question. You're coming with me, Miles said in an unapologetic tone. Esme lifted the plaid and showed her belly, which was already clearly visible. Well, where am I going to go looking like this? Everyone will be beautiful and slim, and I'll be like a pregnant hippo. I'll feel insecure and out of place. How silly you are, after all, laughed Miles and sat down on the edge of the couch beside her. You're the prettiest one I've got and, by the way, pregnancy suits you. Take my word for it, I know what I'm saying. He stroked the bulging tummy affectionately, then leaned over and put his ear to it. Son, let's scold mommy so she won't be a nuisance and get her own way. She needs to obey daddy unquestioningly. Miles squinted his eyes and smiled sweetly. Well, if you insist, Esme surrendered and stretched like a cat on the couch. Where did I get these complexes from? Esme reasoned to herself, if I manage to fall in love with the main founder of the company, why should I be afraid at this corporate party? I think that no one would dare not only to mock me, but even to look at me askance. Moreover, the dress is already bought, invitations sent, the restaurant is booked. All that remains is to say yes at the registration, and I automatically go from civil wife to legal wife. Will you guard me? What if I miscalculate the dose and get drunk? And you'll stop me, Miles burst into her thoughts. Miles drove carefully through the open gate and stopped the car near a large wooden house. He opened the door for Esme, giving her a hand to help her out of the car. Wait a minute, I'll get my bag out of the trunk and let's go, he asked Esme and opened the trunk. Together they went into the house, which was already full of people. Esme smiled embarrassedly. Miles took her hand and led her inside. Colleagues were all smiling, laughing, throwing tinsel at each other. Some blew up clappers and sprinkled confetti on each other. Miles didn't let Esme out of his sight for a minute. When the party was in full swing, someone suggested renting a snowmobile and taking it for a ride. This suggestion was received with a standing ovation, and everyone quickly packed up and headed outside. Miles got on one snowmobile, and Donte and Lillian got on another. The caretaker of the campground sternly warned us that there was a large ravine to the left and we had to be careful. It was already dark, but that didn't stop anyone. On the contrary, it added to the excitement and indescribable excitement. Miles immediately forgot what the caretaker had warned him about. With poor visibility, he moved toward the ravine. At breakneck speed, the snowmobile plummeted into it and overturned. Donte and Lillian, who were riding behind, saw the terrible scene. They rushed to help and began calling an ambulance, but there was no communication. The nearest settlement was quite far away. Donte ran on foot toward the road to catch a passing vehicle and take Miles to the nearest hospital. Donte stopped the car, and they carefully loaded Miles. By the time they got him to the hospital, it was too late. He had passed away without regaining consciousness. The farewell ceremony was held in the funeral hall, where colleagues, friends, and just good acquaintances came. There were many flowers and wreaths. But what happened next, Esme hardly remembered. Some people called her, bringing their condolences, asking how they could help. 9 days passed, and Esme still couldn't believe that Miles was gone. No one would give her a firm shoulder to lean on, hug her, comfort her in her time of need. All through New Year's Eve, Esme just lay on the couch. She put her phone on silent mode and answered only some of the calls that kept coming in on her phone. "I have to go to work tomorrow. I don't feel like it," she thought to herself with a heavy sigh. Neither Lillian nor Donte bothered her once. With Lillian, they met at the wake and for 9 days. There were no personal conversations. They behaved to each other as complete strangers, who by the will of fate were brought together by a common grief. "We'll have to go home today. We have to clean the apartment. No more abusing our hospitality, it's time to honor. Gotta vacate the house." "I'm nobody here," Esme reasoned, lying on the couch, stroking her belly gently. She herself couldn't bear to be in Miles' house. Everything reminded her of him, and it made Esme feel bad. She cried and felt anxious all the time. "Why am I so unhappy? Why does life put me through such serious trials that make me not want to live myself?" She asked herself the same question, and could not find an answer to it. "I wish I could work this month and go on vacation, and then immediately go on maternity leave. I do not want to see anyone. I'll have to talk to Donte, maybe he'll let me work remotely," she sighed and shook her head. In the morning, Esme went into her office, sat down at her desk and immediately turned on her computer. She mentally thanked her colleagues, who didn't ask her uncomfortable questions or express their condolences, but simply did their work in silence. On her lunch break, Clara walked in on her. "Hi, are you going to lunch?" "Yes, of course," Esme sighed and got up from the table. "So, how are you feeling? You're not answering your phone. Good thing you at least sent a message that you're alive and well," Clara scolded her with concern in her voice. "It could have been better, and it can't get any worse," Esme grinned bitterly and looked at her friend. "Hang in there, friend. Everything will be all right." Clara covered her hand with her palm. "I don't even know how to comfort you. I can tell you one thing, for the baby's sake, you must hold yourself together." Clara sighed heavily and stroked her hand with the palm of her hand. "I've booked a car and a movers for tonight. I want to move my things tonight and give Lillian the keys to the house," Esme said quietly and grinned bitterly. "Is she the one who asked you to vacate the house?" "No, I don't think she's up to it. She's in deep shock herself right now," Esme coughed and wiped away a tear. "So, maybe she'll let you live in this house?" Clara asked uncertainly. "What's the point?" Esme shrugged and gasped slightly. "The sooner I get out of there, the better for me. I just can't stand being there. The towels, the pillows, every little thing, it smells like him. Miles is all over me. You have no idea how much torture it is to be there and know that he is gone and never will be again. If I don't get out of there soon, I'll just go crazy. If you only knew how much I miss him. Sometimes I want to howl in despair. I'm only holding on for my son." Esme lowered her eyes and looked at the salad she was struggling to stuff in her mouth. "What if Donte offers to start fresh?" asked Clara cautiously. "Are you out of your mind? What does Donte have to do with anything? It's not like I'm a passing red flag." "How could you even think that?" hissed Esme and looked at Clara as if her worst enemy, not her friend, was sitting in front of her. "Well, I thought he was the father of the baby." So, interrupted Esme and shook her head. Don't be mad. I was just asking. Right now, only a deaf-mute doesn't put forth different thoughts about your future. I hope you haven't blabbed to anyone that Donte is the father of the baby, Esme asked in a whisper and looked around. Well, no, of course not. No one knows about it. Thank God, or people wouldn't have time to work at all. Everyone would just be making up their own versions. Clara raised her eyebrows and grinned bitterly. They'll talk and calm down. Besides, I'm going on maternity leave soon. The month will go by quickly. Esme waved her hand, picking at her plate and trying to eat something. In the evening Esme moved all her things, and in the morning she walked into Lillian's office. Hello, Lillian. Here are the keys to the house. Take them, I won't need them anymore. She held out a bunch of keys. Lillian measured her with her gaze and again stared at the papers that were on the table. Put it on the table, she replied without raising her head. I moved all my stuff out, Esme continued unabashedly, and seeing that Lillian was not responding to her, she turned to leave the office. I thought you were going to live there at least until your 40s, Lillian told her sharply. It's hard for me to be there alone, Esme replied, turning her head near the door, and walked out of the study. Lillian mocked her and angrily threw her pen on the desk. Lillian tried not to be angry with Esme, but she couldn't help it. Subconsciously she blamed her for everything that was happening to them. As soon as that woman came into our lives, everything went wrong. She was nothing but trouble. Misfortunes started happening to us all the time, so I can't see her anymore. She's playing the poor little sheep, all unhappy. I wish I could go on maternity leave so I'd never see her again. Lillian closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. What a fool. How else does she have the conscience to come into my office? She's upset me again. How could my father get involved with her? Did she put a spell on him or something? I don't understand. Lillian took the keys, twirled them in her hand and sighed heavily. What should I do with all this? Listen to Donte and sell the business? Or should I try to continue my father's business myself? Lillian, may I come in? Come in, Lillian replied briefly, and mentally thanked her lawyer for coming in and relieving her of the difficult memories. Something urgent happened? She asked. You asked me to give you the particulars of the movable and immovable property your father owned. Here, take a look. He put the sheet of A4 on the table, and he sat down in the chair next to her chair and watched her reaction carefully while Lillian read the list. I don't get it. Why isn't the house my father lived in registered to him? What kind of tricks are these? She looked at the lawyer with surprised eyes. Didn't he tell you? I thought you knew. It was his wedding present for Esme. It's a shame, of course, that it turned out this way. Miles had planned to solemnly present her with the keys to the house during the wedding ceremony. What? Lillian's face contorted beyond recognition. Has he gone completely mad with his love? No, I don't believe a man in his right mind could do such a thing. Lillian began nervously drumming her fingers on the table and glaring at the lawyer. Can I cancel the deal? I'm sure that thief just bewitched my father. I just can't call it any other way, Lillian hissed angrily. Lillian, it was his gift. The transaction was made in his right mind. It is what your father wanted. He prepared in advance for this event. He thought of everything, consulted me. I talked him out of it, I'll tell you that. But Miles didn't even want to hear anything, continued the lawyer calmly. How I hate her. She's sucking on my father like a leech. Lillian grabbed her temples with her hands and began to massage them. Lillian, put up with your father's last will. I understand it's unpleasant, but there's nothing you can do about it. All right, please leave me alone, Lillian replied and covered her eyes. The information she had received gave her a headache, her mind seemed to boil and a vacuum formed in her head. Half a day Lillian just sat in front of the computer in prostration, wondering what she should do so as not to tear this person into small pieces and say everything she thought about her. Finally, she forced herself to get up from her desk. She went to the mirror, fixed her makeup and hair, and headed for the principal's office. Hi, she replied. What are you so excited about? Like someone's chasing you, quipped Donte and leaned back in his chair. I need to consult. Lillian sat down in her chair and tossed him an A4 sheet. Look what my father has done, and he hasn't even consulted me. I'll never forgive him, she hissed angrily and shook her head. Donte ran his eyes over the sheet. I don't understand anything. Why did you bring me all this? Look carefully at who his house is registered to. Lillian grinned bitterly and watched closely for a reaction. What do you mean? Did he register the house in Esme's name? Goggled Dante's eyes. It's his wedding present, sneered Lillian angrily. It can't be helped. It must be love, Donte said thoughtfully. What love? Don't make me laugh. You must have gone to some witch doctor for a spell, grinned Lillian. Lillian, get over it. Does Esme know about this? Apparently not. If she did, she probably wouldn't have moved into her apartment. Lillian sighed heavily and bit her lower lip. What am I supposed to do? I'm not going to give her the house. Don't even get her hopes up. She won't get anything from me. I wouldn't be me if I gave her the house. It's a matter of principle. Lillian held up her index finger. Isn't real estate enough for you? Why are you killing yourself like they're taking your last piece of bread? He decided to calm Lillian down a little and shrugged his shoulders. It's understandable, it's certainly good for you. After all, she's expecting a child from you. Your son will have a nice inheritance. She smirked and showed Donte a figure of 3 fingers. Tell that thing she's coming into this house. Only over my dead body, Lillian shouted angrily, jumped up from her chair and headed for the exit in quick stride. She stopped at the door, turned around, and said in a sad voice, better talk her out of this reckless deal. For the sake of her father's memory. This house should remain the native grandchildren. In other people's hands, I will not give it. Lillian jumped out of the office and with all her might slammed the door from the other side. Donte sighed heavily and ran his eyes over the sheet Lillian had brought. You'd have to be a fool to refuse such a generous gift. He shook his head. Personally, I wouldn't refuse for anything. But knowing Esme, I don't think she'll fight Lillian and give up this house willingly. We need to talk to her right away and prepare her for this conversation. Esme was sitting at her computer when the secretary informed her that she was summoned to the principal's office. Esme grudgingly grimaced and sighed heavily. How much longer? She shouted to herself. Without saying a word, she got up and headed for the carpet to the director of the firm. You wanted to see me, she muttered grudgingly. Come in, sit down. Donte pointed to her chair. When are you going on maternity leave? He asked, pretending to look at the vacation schedule. And yet he could have asked how her health was, offered to help, knowing how hard it was for her right now. But with her, things always go wrong with him. It's as if his tongue is saying the wrong thing on purpose. Donte began to scold himself to himself. Esme looked at him with a sort of lost look and, without answering his question with anything, sank down in the chair in question. Is that why you invited me? She looked at Donte indifferently and lowered her eyes. There is serious talk. Hear me out. Now I had Lillian. She's furious. Miles rewrote the house you and he lived into you. He wanted to give you such a wedding present. He laid out the information in the same breath and grinned. Both were silent and looked at each other as if they had met for the first time in their lives. Esme measured him with a cold stare and grinned. Are you trying to play a trick on me? Donte, stop it. I'm not in the mood for jokes right now. Tell me why you summoned me, or I'll leave now. Lillian is in shock. She wants you to refuse this gift. But know that I'm on your side. She won't do anything to you. He squinted one eye and smiled. We'll fight her for this house. I'll help you, don't worry. We'll fight? What are you talking about? No Miles, no wedding either. Tell Lillian not to worry. I won't be able to accept this gift. It's her father's house. Then it's her house, too. I have nothing to do with it. If you have everything, I'm off. I have a lot of work to do. Have you thought well? Interrupted her Donte. And there's nothing to think about. I don't want anyone else's, she replied without thinking, and headed for the exit. You're stupid, shouted Donte, and with all his might slammed his fist on the table. She has millions falling from the sky, and she refuses it. He sighed heavily and shook his head. No, I still need to give her smart ideas, and the sooner the better, before she does something stupid. We can't talk normally at work, they're listening to us everywhere. We have to go and visit her today. After work, Donte stopped at the store, bought a cake, fruit, melon, and drove to a familiar address. Hi, again, he smiled as Esme opened the door and her face stretched in surprise. Why are you here? She barely squeezed out, letting him know with all her appearance that he wasn't expected here. How rude you've become, smirked Donte. Will you let me in? I bought a cake for my tea. I was hoping for your hospitality. He tilted his head and looked into her eyes. Come in, replied Esme grudgingly, and stepped aside, letting his guest pass. Esme defiantly folded her arms across her chest and watched Donte. For herself, she concluded that she felt nothing at all for this man. In this short time, he had become a complete stranger to her. What a weird pattern. As soon as the information about the house was disclosed, Donte appeared at once with his advice and moralizing. And the whole New Year vacations he did not even call once and did not ask about his well-being. Donte, without asking permission, took off his shoes and went to the kitchen. He poured water into the kettle, set the cake on the table, washed the fruit, and cut the melon into individual slices. Help yourself, he pointed to the melon with his eyes, you need vitamins. The melon tastes and smells wonderful. Donte rolled his eyes in pleasure. Come on, tell me what you came for, Esme said grudgingly and took a piece of melon. We have one topic of conversation right now, he smiled and shrugged. I want to give you some advice so you don't make up any nonsense and refuse the gift. Consider it your compensation for all the trouble this family has brought us, Donte began gently instructing. Have you said everything? I said everything, he raised his voice, and also, you don't have to be afraid of Lillian. I'm completely on your side. Together we are power. Especially since she doesn't have her main protector right now. And without him, she's like a blind and toothless kitten. He stared at Esme, who was watching him with her eyes wide open. I have no right to this house. I understand Lillian perfectly, it's her inheritance, her ancestral home, Esme shrugged. Think with your head. Who's asking you to live in it? We could sell this house and use the money to go into business. I have many different ideas in my head, but it takes money to do them. For my son's sake, I'm willing to close my eyes to the past and start over with a clean slate. We could be worthy competitors for Lillian. Miles has made sure that you're not left without financial support. So take advantage of it. Don't lose your right to a decent life. Donte, have you said everything? Esme quipped, now go home. This conversation is over. I don't need your advice. And what did you fantasize about us? Esme grinned and shook her head. You know, I realized that I don't love you. And I probably never loved you. It's true, Donte. Esme lowered her eyes and prepared to listen to the unflattering words in her address. I may not love you either, but for the sake of the child, I am willing to work on myself, on our relationship. I want my son to grow up in a full family and not need anything. Believe me, a lot of families live that way. Esme laughed and looked at Donte with surprise. Are you serious right now? Now we're talking, he waved his hand and smiled sourly. You're just stupid and impenetrable. Think hard, Donte choked on his words. I have nothing to think about. This is Lillian's real estate, Esme replied. What a woman you are, after all. Always not thinking about anything, he sneered as he said, Goodbye. Do as you please. Only later it will be too late to think about it. Donte looked at Esme as if she had stolen his hope for a brighter future and left the apartment. In the morning, Donte went straight into his deputy's office. Greetings, Lillian, he said grudgingly and sat down in the nearest chair. You don't have to be so hard on yourself or worry. I was visiting Esme yesterday. She's not going to claim your inheritance, he grinned acidly and looked at Lillian, trying to read the information from her face. Unexpectedly, she replied, Is she completely insane, Or just pretending to be? Lillian raised her eyebrows in surprise. Lillian, well, not everyone can be a shark like you. What? She interrupted him. You should have been born a man. You have a temper, to say the least. I know that from experience. Donte sighed heavily. I came to warn you not to touch Esme. She's been through enough. I need a healthy baby. Donte looked thoughtfully at Lillian. I see. There's a place for nothing, she grinned. Lillian, don't start. I might go back, but she doesn't want me to. I think she'll be mourning Miles for a long time. He tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. You think so? Asked Lillian in surprise. I'm just sure of it, he sighed heavily. Why did we even go to that tourist base? By the way, it was your idea. Lillian looked at Donte point blank. Was it? He wondered. Yes, Donte, it was your idea. Lillian repeated the answer to his question. Maybe you'll blame me for getting Miles on that ill-fated snowmobile, too, Donte quipped with anger in his voice. I don't know, Lillian shook her head. Here, explain to me why a man, knowing he can't go there, abruptly takes that course and ends up in a ravine? Lillian, that's already paranoid. Maybe, she replied thoughtfully and shook her head, so she turned down my father's gift? Good for her. Don't take someone else's. Lillian grinned bitterly and thought about something. You know, I dream about my father almost every night, as if he's trying to tell me something. But I don't know what it is. Lillian sighed heavily. Lillian herself did not understand how it happened that she began to suspect everyone. Every other person seemed to her to be a traitor and had something to do with her father's death. Just now she was looking at Donte and thinking about how she had once felt very strongly about the breakup with this man. She had even had an accident while driving down the highway at breakneck speed, and from the tears she could not see anything around. And now this divorce from Donte seemed like such a small thing compared to losing her father. How many times she had shamed herself for gladly supporting the idea of a corporate party at this base. Lillian sighed heavily. The memory made her heart ache and a chill run down her back. Are you done? She barely squeezed out and shifted her gaze toward the window. Stop fantasizing and blaming everyone for Miles' death. I understand it's hard for you right now. I was at Esme's yesterday, and she's still in a state of distress, too. It can't be helped. He was more needed up there. Donte looked up at the ceiling and crossed his eyes. He was still shivering at the memory of the terrible incident. Not only did he have to run to find a ride, he had to persuade the chauffeur to turn around and make a detour. Then he had to calm down Lillian, who was hysterical and screamed as if her right arm had been amputated without any anesthetic. And now Lillian decided to accuse him, too. That's easy to say, Lillian replied and wiped away her tears. I'll probably never be able to calm down, she sighed heavily. Lillian, Miles was a tough man, but a fair one. I know, she interrupted him. Go to work, she said and ducked into her papers, letting him know by her demeanor that the conversation was over. Esme, don't touch. Please. For the memory of your father, Donte spoke up from his chair and went out. As soon as the door closed behind him, Lillian dropped her head on the table and cried. Lillian, may I come in? The lawyer looked at her with his mouth open and was confused. Lillian, what's wrong? He asked in a worried voice, and with an uncertain step he headed toward her. No, I'm fine, just a memory came over me, she replied, wiping away her tears. Have a seat, I'll calm down. I don't know what's wrong with me, she continued, wiping away her tears with her handkerchief. Is something urgent? No, I came in for a consultation. But it can wait. He began to rise. I'll come back later. The lawyer began to excuse himself guiltily. No, I've already calmed down. Tell me, what is it? She said, wiping her nose with her handkerchief. Esme came by today and asked me to take care of the question of re-registering the house in your name. I came by to ask your opinion on the matter, the lawyer replied, choking up as he continued to look at her with pity. What do you think? Am I doing the right thing? She suddenly asked the question, scrutinizing his surprised face. I don't even know, he stretched out the two words and shook his head. Who knows, she grinned bitterly. That's for you to decide. On the one hand, it's the right thing to do if the house is inherited by an only daughter. But on the other, no, still the house should go to you, the lawyer replied categorically after some thought. What an honest person this Esme is, who would have thought? I guess my father fell in love with her for a reason, said Lillian thoughtfully, and yet I can't give up the house. It's a memory, she continued with a heavy sigh. I understand that it's my father's will, but I can't help it. I think it will be the only right thing to do, Lillian ordered. Esme came home. She changed into her homemade outfit, got fresh tomatoes, cucumber, dill, and onions from the refrigerator. The girl washed the vegetables, took a knife, and began to cut the salad. The trill of the doorbell sounded. Is it Donte again? I'm sick of him, she sighed and went to open the door. On the threshold stood Lillian. May I come in? She looked Esme over from head to toe, watching her confusion. Come in, Esme barely squeezed out, continuing to stand and stare at Lillian, wondering what the reason was for her coming in. Would you let me in then? Esme silently stepped aside from the door, letting the uninvited guest pass. Lillian took off her boots and walked into the hall. She looked around the apartment and sank into an armchair. I've been to the cemetery, and there are fresh flowers. Lillian hesitated a little, choosing words to continue the conversation. Yes, I took a leave of absence today, from the head of the department, before lunch. I went to a doctor's appointment and stopped by Miles and put the flowers in, Esme replied calmly. Thank you for not forgetting, said Lillian, almost crying. Well, you can't forbid me that, Esme replied, continuing to watch her guest in disbelief. It's so hard for me, cried Lillian and covered her face with her hands. Me too. But I'm only holding on for my son, Esme wiped away a tear and put her hands on her stomach. Lillian wiped away her tears and looked at Esme. I'll help you exchange this apartment for a new one in a nice neighborhood. We'll make repairs. I'll take care of all the expenses. Esme just opened her mouth to object, but Lillian beat her to it, and it's out of the question. I think Father would approve of my decision. Esme stood there with her mouth open, wondering how best to respond to such an act of goodwill from Lillian. Finally, she came to her senses, coughed to recover her voice, which was missing from excitement, and barely squeezed out, Why so generous? You mean you don't want anything from me? Are you so proud? Replied Lillian in surprise, and grinned. Why on earth should you help me? Shrugged Esme. From her surprised look, Lillian realized that Esme really couldn't understand it. It didn't sink into her mind that Lillian had been unable to sleep peacefully all this time, and was constantly thinking about her father's last will. It was eating her up from the inside, breaking her bones, and making her soul ache with pain. Once Esme surrendered her position without a fight, the obsessions overpowered and kept Lillian in the world. She couldn't escape the thought that she was missing something and doing everything wrong. I guess your father really managed to love you in such a short period of your life together. Everything I do now is for my father's memory. I always wanted him to be proud of me. I wish I had given him that opportunity when he was alive. I want you to always remember him, too. Even if you arrange your personal life, please don't forget him. Lillian looked at Esme with a completely lost look. Thank you. Tears appeared in Esme's eyes. I don't even know how to relate to this. Honestly, I think I'm dreaming, Esme whispered and lowered her eyes. Wake up, Lillian replied grudgingly and rose from her chair. It's going to be okay. We have to get everything done before the baby is born. You don't do nothing either. It's in your best interest first of all, Lillian said clearly, trying to hold herself together and not completely fall apart. I'm uncomfortable, Esme began to justify herself, but she didn't have time to finish. Lillian interrupted her. It's uncomfortable to sleep on the ceiling. It's compensation from my father for the failed wedding. Take it for granted and look at things more simply. Give, hey, take, and beat, run. Lillian looked point blank at Esme. I don't understand what men see in you. Esme cringed at this penetrating look from Lillian. She looked away embarrassed. Only there is no happiness, and probably never will be again, Esme replied with a heavy sigh. You shouldn't think so. Life doesn't end there. You'll have a baby soon, and then maybe your father will come along. Donte is free now, Lillian began to reassure her. That's just what I needed. I'm certainly not going to have a relationship with him, not even for my son's sake, Esme grinned. Fine, work it out for yourselves. I'm not interested anymore. Lillian zipped up her boots, threw on her coat, and took hold of the handle on the front door without buttoning it. Get involved in the process. Take an active part. Look for options that will suit you. We don't have much time, Lillian admonished one last time and walked out into the hallway. Esme closed the door and cautiously slid down the wall to the floor. She sat like that for about 30 minutes, replaying the conversation with Lillian in her head and not believing her own ears. An incomprehensible feeling of uneasiness and some kind of discomfort never left her. What is she up to? Did she have nowhere else to put her money and decide to do charity work? Or was she just trying to please her ego? I won't refuse her help, of course. If she has such a desire, let her help. Moreover, I have long wanted to change this apartment. If it will make her feel better, I will only be glad for the improvement of my living conditions. Esme gave birth to a brown-eyed, dark-haired boy on time. When she saw her son first, she couldn't get enough of him. How much he looks like me, with only an eye shape like Donte's, she admired the little lump, which shrunk a little, making him even more beautiful and native. Who cares what he looks like? The main thing is to be healthy and happy, she continued to consider the most beloved and dearest man of her life. Donte and Clara picked Esme up from the maternity hospital and brought him to his new apartment. The apartment was in a new house, in an upscale area of town with a great view out the window and a great playground. Lillian made sure Esme felt comfortable in her new apartment. She provided for all the little things, put in expensive plumbing fixtures, built in a new kitchen and gave a children's room. Miles would soon be 3 years old. Esme has already put him in kindergarten, and in a month she will have to go to work. Her maternity leave is over, and she has to get back to work. She does not even dream of a personal life, all her free time is directed to her son, who pleases her with his intelligence and new knowledge of his childish worldview. Donte pays her alimony faithfully and takes her son on weekends. He takes him for walks in the park or on the playground. He is remarried, perhaps soon to be a father. Esme has no interest in his personal life. They maintain a friendly relationship, just for Miles' sake. Lillian never remarried. She spends all her personal time not building relationships, but expanding her business. She is desperately short of time for her personal life. And what will their future be like? That will be another story.
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in new